there's been a couple teams that are really standing out and doing well at the start of the season, but we have one undefeated team left 9 games into the year, 8 or 9 games into the year, depending on how many teams have played. But that is the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks, despite not having Chris Middleton yet, their second best player, remain undefeated.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that the Bucks are getting, for a couple of years, the Bucks were such a regular season juggernaut that would get figured out every year in the playoffs. And that was kind of their brand, not quite like a paper tiger, but Bud got this reputation for just being a poor playoff adjuster and just this team that was very stubborn and sticking to their system. So then they switched the past couple seasons into being this team that would kind of play it fast and loose and not dominate the regular season. And then go into the playoffs a lot more flexible, and that sort of like paid off for them. They won a title, and if it wasn't for Chris Middleton's injury in the playoffs, the one he's still struggling with now, they might have gone to the finals again. They might have gone back to back. Who knows? That's just a possibility, but they get the benefit of the doubt when you win one championship and then you start the next season 8-0, 9-0. They're 9-0 now.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing is
a lot of these teams.
They have. Yeah, they're number 2 in point differential. The number 1 team being the Cavaliers, which we've talked about a little bit recently. Mm-hmm. But I think the interesting thing is they're the best defense in the NBA up to this point. Also right up there with the Cavaliers. Turns out defense wins the regular season games. But the interesting thing that I've thought is their defense has held up so well this year, despite their wing rotation really not being very ideal. That's interesting because that's really what kind of sunk them against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference playoffs last year, is their wing rotation without Chris Middleton in there just really got beat up on and taken advantage of. But they have, those same guys, Grayson Allen and Wes Matthews, playing a lot of minutes in the stead of Chris Middleton, but they're holding up so far. Best defense in the NBA by a not insignificant margin either.
Well, it's interesting that you compare them to the Cavs, the number 2 ranked defense, because, and this is not exactly how the Cavs are. The Cavs are famous for having their 2 excellent offensive guards and their 2 excellent defensive big men. One of the things that's working for the Milwaukee Bucks defense is, again, like being kind of wingless like the Cavs, which is why I'm drawing the comparison to the 2, but they start 2 pretty monster point of attack defenders. Like Javon Carter has emerged, not quite out of nowhere, because like he was bouncing around the league last year and getting a little bit of buzz, but I mean, he's out there as sort of a defensive specialist next to Jrue Holiday, who is always kind of a defensive specialist, but has a ton of offensive responsibilities on this team as well. He's second on the team in field goal attempts, and he's their, main point guard. So they start these kind of like the Chicago Bulls last year. They've got 2 really strong point of attack defenders disrupting things up front. But unlike the Bulls of last year when they were healthy, they also have Brook Lopez and Giannis Antetokounmpo it's behind them. So really they're getting the best of both worlds. And it's just kind of interesting to see these, like, wings are such an important glue piece to modern NBA defenses. And like teams like the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics, we talk about the depth of their wings and their switchability and stuff like that. And the 2 top defenses in the NBA, like, aren't currently playing a starting caliber NBA small forward.
No, and in the Bucks case, it's been Grayson Allen. And, at first glance, it seems like, oh man, they're really small because, like you mentioned, Javon Carter, a smaller guy, mostly defending guards. And then you have Jrue Holiday, who's a little bit more switchable, has a little bit more size to him. So he can match up against some forwards at least. But yeah, Grayson Allen out there, they seem really undersized, but I think a large part of their defensive success has been Brook Lopez being able to return to form, which I think it's safe to say that was a little bit up in the air because you have a 34-year-old guy who had back surgery last year and missed the majority of the season. I think he played 13 games all of last season and then some in the playoffs. But, like a center in his mid-30s with back surgery is not exactly like, the most promising outlook going into the year, but he's really held up well. Brook Lopez has played and started every single game for them so far and is playing over 30 minutes a game. And he's returned to being the really excellent rim protector that he's shown to be the last couple of years in Milwaukee.
Yeah. I was pretty encouraged in the playoffs last year when he just came back from that back surgery and still looked pretty normal, like didn't look like a fundamentally changed player in terms of his mobility, where, you know, when you think about, Dwight Howard going to the Lakers back in the day, like after that back injury, like, oh, big men, that can really, really change a defensive elite big man. I remember thinking about that a lot last year when Brook was out the whole season. I was like, maybe this monstrous defensive front line is over. But yeah, Brook Lopez is averaging like 2.6 blocks per game so far, and just being the monstrous rim protector with just enough switchability that he's not really taken advantage of in schemes, even though he like mostly stays in drop. He's a lot more mobile than maybe some people would picture him. Giannis Antetokounmpo is getting Defensive Player of the Year buzz already, but I remember, I think during Giannis's first Defensive Player, like the first season he won or whatever, there was a quiet contingent that were like, is Brook Lopez actually the best defender? I mean, like, he is the center and he is the one sort of anchoring that back line, and the Bucks did not hold up defensively without him last year. He deserves every little bit of credit and piece of hype he can get. Like, two of us talking about him on an obscure NBA podcast. You deserve this, Brook. But I guess Grayson Allen is their small forward, right? Like, that's, I feel like they play three like 6'5" guards, or like not even really quite six. Like, I feel like they play three guards and just call one of them the wing. But I feel like it is Drew Holiday guarding a lot of those matchups, and they put Grayson Allen on the least threatening. So, I mean, I think on nights where the three is not a big offensive piece, you can slide Grayson Allen over there. But anytime it's a threat, it's Giroux, and after that, it's Javon Carter. Javon Carter also averaging leading the team in steals, so being that pesky point of attack guy that is making this all work. They still bring George Hill off the bench. He's a lot older too, but still like a defensive minded player.
Yeah, Grayson Allen needs to be out there, and he's the weak link defensively, right? Although he hasn't been too much weak link, obviously, because the team's been so good on that side of the floor. But he's the only guy on the team that's been an elite 3-point shooter this year. I mean, he's shooting over 40%, and he's taking 5 threes a game, so it's not a small sample size. I mean, he's a really good shooter. He's really emerged into that role. So they need him on the floor, absolutely, to keep the offense afloat, because the Bucks, they're in the bottom half of the NBA offensively right now. It's really, offense is not the reason they're winning games. It's Giannis averaging 33 points a game, and the rest of the team doing just enough to get them over the hump there. But so, I mean, I understand they need Grayson Allen out there, but it does make them a little bit small. I don't think that's a huge problem in the regular season. I mean, Javon Carter's, I think 6'1" or 6'2". He's not a big guard, but he's a bulldog. I mean, in college when he was at West Virginia, the offense was kind of a concern, but he was just so impactful on the defensive end. He was a little bit similar to Davion Mitchell, although probably got a little bit less publicity for it. But just like that small guard who's just kind of a bulldog, and he's just like in your face, getting steals, preventing you from being able to dribble comfortably. And that's really how he's carved out a role here as a starting NBA guard right now, too.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when he signed with the Bucks, I didn't think much of it. He was on Brooklyn before that, and the year before that he was in Phoenix. Suns. I mean, he's been cracking rotations like since he came into the NBA. And like, it's nice to see him now get a chance to really take advantage of this opportunity. I guess like the question is with them, like, defensively, I think they only stand to improve when Chris Middleton comes back and takes minutes away from some of their lesser defenders. But, right now they're jacking up a ton of threes. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Grayson Allen is the only plus 3-point shooter on this roster. They've got plenty of average-ish 3-point shooters, like Brook Lopez, Drew Holiday, a whole bunch of guys who can shoot around league average from three. But yeah, right now it's just Grayson Allen. George Hill George Hill's going to shoot it better. Jordan Nwora maybe can shoot a little bit better. I don't know, anything they get out of Wes Matthews at this point, I think is a bonus. Serge Ibaka is like on the borderline of the rotation, and he can shoot it from three, but he's also like most likely to be like a 35-36% guy, even though he's shooting it pretty well right now in limited minutes. So if they go through a shooting slump, or if Grayson Allen plays less minutes when Chris Middleton comes back, what happens if this offense drops from around league average to sort of like being kind of bad?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the worry, but they do have some wiggle room just because, like we talked about, they are pretty close to the top of the NBA in point differential. And, that's really the question is, when Chris Middleton comes back, do you want to drop Grayson Allen to the bench, or do you want to drop Javon Carter to the bench? I mean, keeping Grayson Allen in the starting lineup, I think would probably be more prudent, just because it would help this team. There's only upside offensively switching Javon Carter, who's like making just enough threes to kind of survive on the offensive side of the floor, but is not a guy who's ever going to be lighting the opposing team up. Swapping him out for Chris Middleton, I mean, that's a huge, massive upgrade offensively. If you can survive on the defensive side of the floor, which I think you can, especially if Javon Carter continues being your sixth man, playing a decent amount of minutes, I don't think the bottom would drop out on the offensive side of the floor with the Bucks. I think they'd maintain at least league average and have room to improve as well.
If I was coaching the Bucks, if I was Mike Budenhauser, I think I'd be more inclined to bench Grayson Allen, and keep Javon Carter in that starting lineup. I think that once you get to the playoffs, having that impregnable defense on the floor to start games, and not having a juicy spot for the other guy to attack, for your opponent to attack. If they're surviving right now with Grayson Allen as the only plus 3-point shooter, Chris Middleton is just as good, if not better, or at least more proven of a 3-point shooter than Grayson Allen is. Like, slot him into that spot, continue to be average in terms of like 3-point shooting, but you're also getting a whole lot more like offensive three-dimensionality when Chris Middleton comes back, because you get another guy who can create off the dribble. He's sort of their best, like, ball handling scorer. So that's already going to boost your offense on its own. This is like being random and nitpicky. Like, I think you can leave either, like, Grayson Allen versus Javon Carter is not going to fundamentally change this team, but I like the idea of them just continuing to be like a high minute defensive impregnable wall that can build good offensive bench lineups around guys like Grayson Allen and Bobby Portis and whoever else. I wonder what they're like who of these guys, sort of like 7 through 10, are going to be able to crack their playoff rotation. Because even though it's cool the Bucks are back to looking like a regular season juggernaut, this is a team that is considered by many to be a championship favorite. So looking forward to who the guys who are going to play big minutes. And Grayson Allen got picked on by the Boston Celtics, like, pretty relentlessly. It's like we and if Chris Middleton wasn't injured and Grayson Allen was playing in a smaller role, that's like, there's less opportunities to pick on him. But again, I think it's always just nice to be able to just strangle the other team right off the bat and not let them get into a rhythm, and then win bench matchups with, like, by bringing in some offensive punch. But again, kind of nitpicky. Either way sounds good to me. Yeah, they're in a good position. I mean, they're 9-0.
I will say, like, it's possible to be a liability in the playoffs on the offensive side of the floor too. So you would hope with Javon Carter, if he is in that starting role and playing more minutes than Grayson Allen, that other teams aren't just going to be able to leave him open and sag off of him and hurt the Bucks as a result. I mean, we've seen that happen lots of times in the playoffs recently. It's not just guys who get picked on by having to switch onto a star player and then get demolished in a one-on-one matchup. There can also kill your spacing if you play a non-shooter too much, and that gives the defense a extra guy to just kind of like play the safety role and stick in the paint and prevent driving lanes. So there's a couple different ways to do it.
Fortunately for the Bucks, besides Giannis, they don't really have non-shooters, right? Like, who's their worst shooter that figures to be a rotation piece after Giannis. Like it might be Brook Lopez. Like again, like all these guys are sort of around like 35% shooters so far this year.
I was gonna say probably Bobby Portis, but I mean he has a decent mid-range game, and he's not horrible from three. I mean he's shooting 33% right now, but that's still not a guy that you'd want to leave wide open if he is hitting 33% of his shots.
Yeah, and Bobby Portis is going to like he comes in as an offensive threat. So whether that's you're not going to hurt the Bucks by like stashing like by ignoring Bobby Porter on offense. Like he's definitely
you can't put like a small defender on him.
Yeah. Also, like 33% from three is not really indicative of what he's been in his career as a shooter. Like 2 seasons ago, he shot almost like 50% from three on the season. Like he's definitely a qualified floor spacer in the front court sort of thing. So I don't think teams in the playoffs are going to be like, yeah, let's leave Bobby Portis open. Maybe the only coach in the NBA who would do that is currently coaching the Bucks. If anyone remembers how the Bucks lost their final game in the playoffs, it was Bud's absolute insistence that they will not guard Grant Williams from three, no matter how many threes he hits. It was like he's going to stop hitting them.
And to be fair, I mean, if the Bucks could have just waited another couple of games, Grant Williams couldn't make a shot all of the Heat series. So
absolutely,
it was that's so close to that working.
It's one of those interesting things when you watch it happen in real time, where the coach is going to trust the math and think that Grant Williams is not going to hit a trillion threes in this game, that he's going to go cold in a second, or whether you overreact or just react at all, because that, I guess wouldn't have been an overreaction because it did sink them that game. And people were dragging Bud like online and on Twitter and everything and making fun of him for not guarding Grant Williams. But I think if before the game you had asked people to or what's the likelihood of Grant Williams like dropping 9 threes in a game or whatever, you wouldn't have had, like, the Celtics weren't hedging their strategy on that. That was
no,
it was a bit, you fortify your defense by choosing to not overreact to a shooter, and if that shooter gets hot, then you're vulnerable, and that just kind of ended up being like a ugly bit of luck for the Bucks then. But
Spoelstra didn't guard Grant Williams either, and it turned out to be the right call. So that's the hard thing about playing the results game, right? Like, even if your process is correct, it doesn't mean you're always going to get the result you want. There are outliers, and there are times when weird stuff happens, like a poor 3-point shooter or a below average 3-point shooter just getting crazy hot for one game. It happens.
Yeah. So is this a thing? Are the Bucks going to go 82-0?
I'm going to say no on the 82-0, but can we start with, are they going to finish as the 1 seed in the East? I think that's more attainable this year.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be sort of wild to not pick them at this point. They're 9-0, missing their second best offensive player.
Yeah.
Cleveland's looking awesome too, but smart money is on the Bucks right now, and I think it'd be. There's another couple teams. I'm not saying it'd be crazy if Milwaukee didn't finish first. They might face an injury at some point this season. Maybe
well, they are right now, and it's not slowing them down.
Yeah. I would count on the Bucks to continue to be very, very good for this season.
I'll temper my expectation, and I say I'll expect them to finish top 2. I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland finishes with the #1 record in the East, but I'm also the guy that predicted the Bucks to really struggle with Chris Middleton being out to start the year, and they're awesome without him. So what do I know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a good bet too. I'm surprised at how strong. I definitely was not predicting like Javon Carter and Grayson Allen being the things that made this work en route to a 9-0 start to the season.